I am Savannah Hall. I am 32 years old. Last Thanksgiving, my parents stood up in front of our extended family to hand my older brother a $15,000 luxury cruise package. Then my mother turned to me, handed me a crumpled $2 Mega Millions ticket, and smirked. She told the room that this was the only thing that suited my tax bracket. The whole table laughed. They had no idea that tiny piece of paper was about to win me $50 million. And they certainly did not know that when they found out and left me 115 frantic voicemails, I would not answer a single one. Before I show you exactly how I dismantled their perfect lives, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Eldenly Stories. Let me know your age in the comments and tell me where you are watching from. I love seeing who is joining me on this journey. Now let me take you back to that Thanksgiving afternoon in Dallas, Texas. The Hall family. Thanksgiving was never about gratitude. It was a performance. I pulled my 4-year-old Honda sedan into my parents' long circular driveway in Highland Park at exactly 1 in the afternoon. I was not there as a guest. I was there because the caterers needed supervision. I barely had my foot out of the car when the front door opened. My mother, Brenda, stood on the porch wearing a tailored cashmere sweater, holding a silver tray of bacon-wrapped dates. She did not say hello or offer a hug. She just extended the tray toward me. "Go check the heating elements on the patio, chafing dishes, Savannah," she instructed. "And move your car to the street before the guests arrive. It ruins the landscaping aesthetic." I took the tray and walked inside. My father, Richard, was sitting in his leather armchair, scrolling through his tablet. The football game played silently on the large television. He did not look up when I walked past. "Just make sure the coolers out back have enough ice," he said to the screen. 10 minutes later, the energy in the house shifted. The front door chimed. My mother practically jogged to the foyer. My father set his tablet down and stood up. My older brother, Brandon, had arrived. Brandon was 34 and worked as a wealth manager. He had a smile built for country club networking and a moral compass that pointed strictly toward whoever had the most cash. He walked in holding a bottle of wine, followed by his wife Jessica, who looked like she spent her morning in a salon chair. They parked their leased Range Rover directly in front of the oak doors. No one asked them to move it to the street. "There is my boy," my father announced. He pulled Brandon into a tight embrace. My mother hovered over Jessica, praising her dress in a voice an octave higher than the one she used with me. I stood by the kitchen island folding linen napkins. I am a forensic accountant. I spend my days tracking missing assets and analyzing corporate discrepancies. The discrepancy in my own family was obvious. Brandon was the high-yield investment. I was the overhead cost, necessary but ignored. I carried the napkins outside to the patio and set the long table under the Texas sun. Through the glass doors, I watched my family pour drinks and laugh together. I told myself my quiet independence was enough. An hour later, the patio was full of aunts, uncles, and cousins. The noise settled down when my father stood at the head of the table. He picked up his crystal wineglass and tapped it with a silver fork. The sharp sound cut through the chatter. I stood near the drink station holding a pitcher of water. I did not know it yet, but the next few minutes would hand me the exact weapon I needed to tear their facade to the ground. Richard raised his glass higher. The afternoon sun caught the crystal casting small prisms across the outdoor dining table. "I want to toast my son," Richard said, his voice booming over the quiet yard. "Brandon has shown incredible financial acumen this year. He navigated a tough fiscal quarter, expanded his firm portfolio, and still found time to be an outstanding son and a provider." Brandon leaned back in his chair wearing a look of practiced humility. He swirled the expensive red wine in his glass. He wore a tailored suit jacket over a crisp white shirt, looking exactly like the successful wealth manager he claimed to be. "Brenda and I decided that such hard work deserves a proper reward," Richard continued. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a thick, glossy envelope. He handed it down the length of the table. Brandon opened the seal. Jessica leaned over his shoulder, her manicured nails gripping his arm, her eyes scanning the gold-embossed itinerary inside. Jessica let out a high-pitched gasp. A Caribbean cruise. First class, Richard clarified, ensuring the aunts and uncles at the far end of the table heard the specific detail. 14 days sailing through the Virgin Islands and St. Bart's for the four of us. Brandon, Jessica, your mother, and me. I put 15,000 down to ensure we have the premier balcony suites. We set sail in early December to celebrate properly. The table erupted into applause. My cousins clapped. Aunt Caroline raised her glass. They were all participating in the ritual validating the rigid hierarchy my parents demanded. I stood by the drink station holding a heavy glass water pitcher. I did not react. I simply watched the performance unfold. Then the applause faded. The spotlight needed a shadow to make it shine brighter. That was my role. My mother turned her attention away from Brandon and locked eyes with me. Her smile remained, but the maternal warmth vanished, replaced by a sharp theatrical pity. Now, Savannah, Brenda said, projecting her voice so the entire patio could hear every syllable. We did not forget about you. She reached into her designer cardigan and pulled out a small, wrinkled rectangle of paper. She held it out across the table. I walked forward on steady legs and took it from her hand. It was a Mega Millions lottery ticket. The purchase price printed at the top read $2. The edges were frayed like it had been sitting at the bottom of her purse for a week among loose change and old receipts. This is what suits your tax bracket, Savannah, my mother stated. Her tone was light and conversational, designed to sound like an innocent joke. Maybe you will get lucky since hard work is clearly not paying off for you. A heavy silence hung in the air for a fraction of a second. Then my uncle chuckled. A cousin smirked. Soon the entire table was laughing at my expense. Jessica took a sip of her champagne and adjusted her diamond tennis bracelet. Well, she chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, at least she can use the $2 for gas money to drive her little sedan back to her apartment. More laughter echoed across the manicured lawn. I stood at the center of the patio holding the crumpled ticket. The heat rose in my cheeks, but I forced my expression to remain entirely blank. As a forensic accountant, I am trained to remove emotion from the equation. Emotion clouds judgment. Emotion leads to mistakes. I looked down at the ticket. $2. That was my exact valuation in this family. I looked up from the slip of paper, and my gaze drifted past my mother, past Brandon, and landed at the far end of the long oak table. Grandpa Wyatt sat there holding a glass of iced tea. He was the only person not laughing. Wyatt Hall was a stoic Texas rancher. He had built his life on actual dirt and sweat in the hill country, running cattle and managing hundreds of acres of raw land. His skin was sun-beaten. His hands were thick and calloused from decades of manual labor. He possessed a quiet, unshakable grit that my father had never inherited. Richard preferred the air-conditioned comfort of a suburban country club and the illusion of self-made wealth. Grandpa Wyatt despised the Highland Park illusion. He attended these dinners purely out of obligation, usually remaining silent and observing the vanity around him. But in that moment, across a table full of mocking relatives, Wyatt met my eyes. The old man gave me a single grim nod. It was a silent communication, an acknowledgement of the rot underneath this pristine family gathering. He saw through Richard's boastful speeches. He knew Brandon was all flash and no substance. That nod was a tether to reality. It told me I was not crazy. I was just outnumbered. I slipped the cheap lottery ticket into the pocket of my slacks. I picked up the empty water pitcher from the table. "Excuse me," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I will go grab the coats for those leaving early." I turned my back on the laughter and walked inside. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind me, cutting off the noise of the patio. The house was quiet, smelling of expensive floral arrangements and roasted turkey. I navigated the long hallway toward my father's home office. Richard's study was a monument to unearned arrogance. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves displayed pristine hardcovers that had never been read. Golf trophies gleamed on the windowsill. The room smelled of expensive leather and polished wood. I walked toward the sofa in the corner where several guests had piled their jackets. I gathered a few coats into my arms. As I turned to leave, the heavy fabric of a trench coat caught the edge of a stack of manila folders resting dangerously close to the edge of the mahogany desk. The folders spilled over the side, papers scattered across the expensive Persian rug in a chaotic mess. I let out a quiet sigh and knelt down to clean up the spill. I gathered the loose sheets of paper, tapping their edges against the hardwood floor to align them. Then my trained eyes caught something wrong. When you spend 40 hours a week hunting for hidden assets and financial discrepancies, your brain learns to recognize anomalies instantly. It becomes a reflex. I stopped gathering the papers and pulled one specific document from the center of the pile. It was a thick legal contract. Several paragraphs were heavily redacted with thick black marker, which is an unusual sight for casual home office files. I scanned the visible text. It outlined a secondary mortgage agreement. The numbers listed at the top of the page made the air leave my lungs. $300,000. But that was not the anomaly that froze my blood. I flipped to the final page. I found the signature line. The printed name beneath the line read Wyatt Hall. Beside it was a signature written in blue ink. I stared at the looping letters. Grandpa Wyatt has a very distinct signature. Decades of gripping reins and mending fences gave his handwriting a rigid, blocky pressure. His letters always leaned sharply to the left. The signature on this document was smooth. The loops were rounded and practiced. The slant leaned heavily to the right. It was a decent emulation, but to a forensic expert it was undeniably wrong. It was a forgery. Someone had forged my grandfather's signature on a legal financial document involving $300,000 of debt. I looked at the date next to the notary stamp, 3 weeks ago. The puzzle pieces snapped together in my mind with terrifying clarity. Brandon's sudden influx of cash, the extravagant Caribbean cruise my father just purchased, the confident speeches about navigating tough fiscal quarters. Brandon was not a financial genius. He was bleeding money, and he and my father were using Grandpa Wyatt's legacy to cover the staggering losses. I crouched on the floor of the silent study, holding the forged document in one hand and feeling the crumpled $2 lottery ticket in my pocket with the other. The humiliation on the patio suddenly felt very distant. My family thought they had put me in my place. They thought I was just the invisible workhorse too slow to keep up with their boundless success. They had no idea they had just handed the blueprints of their own destruction directly to a forensic accountant. My hand did not shake. My heart rate did not spike. When your daily routine involves tracing stolen corporate funds and unmasking white-collar criminals, you develop a high tolerance for deception. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the camera application and turned off the flash. I held the phone over the forged document. The camera shutter clicked silently. I flipped to the next page and took another photo. I documented the signature, the loan terms, the interest rates, and the notary seal. Every digital image was a pristine piece of ammunition loaded into a chamber. I read the fine print. The details painted a grim and terrifying picture of my brother and his supposed financial empire. Brandon was not a wealth manager expanding his portfolio. He was a sinking ship taking on water. He had accumulated staggering fiscal deficits. To cover his tracks, he and my father had taken out a secondary mortgage using Grandpa Wyatt Hill Country Ranch as collateral. That ranch was not just a piece of property. Wyatt Hall bought those 300 acres 50 years ago. He cleared the brush with his own hands, built the main house from local timber, and ranched the land through droughts and recessions. It was his legacy. It was the only honest thing the Hall family possessed. My father and brother had wagered that legacy on a predatory loan. The paperwork detailed a brutal 36% interest rate with a balloon payment due in exactly 12 months. The lending entity was not a reputable national bank. It was a private equity group functioning as a shadow lender known for seizing assets the moment a payment was missed. I snapped a photo of the wire transfer authorization. The borrowed funds were not going into a conservative investment to generate safe returns. They were being funneled directly into Brandon's personal holding company to satisfy his immediate debts. The $15,000 Caribbean cruise was never a celebration. I understood the strategy instantly. It was a smokescreen. My father purchased that lavish vacation to keep the family looking the other way. He needed Brandon to appear prosperous to maintain the illusion of success. More importantly, they needed Grandpa Wyatt out of the state and distracted while the predatory lender processed the property liens in the background. If Wyatt went on that cruise, he would not be checking his mail or answering calls from his local bank. I carefully restacked the papers. I aligned the edges perfectly, ensuring they looked exactly as they had before they spilled onto the rug. I placed the stack back on the mahogany desk, pushing it to the precise millimeter where it had originally rested. I slid my phone back into my pocket. I gathered the guests' coats from the leather sofa and draped them over my arm. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air of the study fill my lungs. I buried the anger deep in my chest. I opened the door and walked back down the hallway. When I stepped out onto the patio, the atmosphere was loud and celebratory. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. The family had moved on from the cruise announcement and were now sharing stories and pouring more drinks. I walked over to a cluster of chairs and handed Aunt Caroline her jacket. As I turned around, Brandon gestured for me to come over to his end of the table. He was holding the empty bottle of red wine he had brought. Jessica sat next to him, resting her chin on her hand, looking incredibly bored. Savannah Brandon called out over the chatter, "I am glad I caught you. I was just telling Uncle Robert about this vintage. It is an exclusive reserve from a private vineyard in Napa. I brought it to share with everyone, but it was pretty steep." He pulled his phone from his tailored slacks and tapped the screen. "Since you had a glass earlier, I am just going to send you a Venmo request for your portion," he said, his smile perfectly bright and entirely hollow. $50 should cover your share. Just approve it when you get a chance." I looked at the empty wine bottle. I had poured myself exactly one splash of that wine 3 hours ago. Brandon was currently sitting on $300,000 of stolen equity hijacked from our grandfather. He was preparing to embark on a first-class tropical vacation funded by deceit. Yet he still felt the need to squeeze $50 out of his younger sister just to assert his dominance. Jessica let out a soft sigh and inspected her manicure. "Honestly, Brandon," she murmured, acting as though she was doing me a favor, "do not press her for it. She might need to save her pennies this month." A naive person would have exploded. A weaker person would have slammed her hands on the table and screamed about the forged document sitting inside the office. They would have pointed fingers and demanded justice right then and there. But I knew my father. I knew my brother. If I confronted them without a bulletproof strategy, they would instantly deploy gaslighting. Richard would laugh and tell the family I was confused. He would say I misread complex financial instruments because I was just a mid-level accountant who did not understand high-tier wealth management. They would deny everything, pack their bags, and isolate Grandpa Wyatt even further. I needed undeniable leverage. I needed a position of power so formidable they could not talk their way out of it. I pulled my smartphone from my blazer pocket. I opened the application and saw the payment request glowing on the screen. "No problem at all, Brandon," I said. My voice was smooth and unbothered. I hit the approve button. The funds transferred instantly. "It is worth every penny to celebrate your success." Brandon smirked and pocketed his phone. "Thanks, sis. Glad you enjoyed it." I spent the next 2 hours cleaning up the remnants of their feast. I scraped plates, wiped down the outdoor tables, and loaded the dishwasher while my family retreated to the living room to watch football and sip bourbon. I did not speak unless spoken to. I played my role to perfection. The invisible workhorse ensuring the stage remained clean for the stars of the show. By the time I finally left the Highland Park estate, the sun had set and the Texas sky was a deep navy blue. I drove my Honda down the quiet suburban streets, leaving the gated community behind. The silence inside my car was heavy. The weight of what I had discovered pressed down on my shoulders. My brother was a thief. My father was an accomplice. My grandfather was the victim. I pulled into the parking lot of my modest apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. I turned off the ignition and sat in the driver's seat. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled down in the crisp autumn air. I reached into my pocket to retrieve my keys. My fingers brushed against the crumpled piece of paper my mother had handed me in front of the entire family, the $2 lottery ticket. I pulled it out and flattened the creased edges against the steering wheel. The Mega Millions logo stared back at me. It was a special promotional scratch-off ticket branded by the state lottery. My mother thought it was the perfect insult. A cheap gamble for a daughter she viewed as a failure. I reached into the cup holder and found a small silver coin. I figured I would scratch the play area, check the result, and throw the trash away before going inside to draft my battle plan. I pushed the small overhead dome light. The interior of the car filled with a dim yellow glow. I pressed the edge of the coin against the silver coating on the ticket. I scratched away the first circle, revealing a number 12. I scratched the next circle, a 24, then a 36. I pulled out my phone and opened the Texas Lottery results page. The drawing for this specific promotional run had occurred yesterday evening. I looked at the winning numbers glowing on my digital screen. 12, 24, 36. My breath caught in my throat. The air inside the car suddenly felt very thin. I pressed the coin harder against the paper, scratching away the remaining silver film in rapid, frantic strokes. The gray dust collected on my slacks. 48, 52. I checked the phone screen. 48, 52. My hand stopped moving. There was only one circle left, the final multiplier number, the jackpot requirement. I stared at the last patch of silver coating. The ambient noise of the nearby highway faded into total silence. I slowly scraped the coin across the final circle. The printed ink beneath the film revealed a bold red number 7. I looked at the official winning sequence on my phone one last time. 12, 24, 36, 48, 52, and a red 7. I sat frozen in the driver's seat of my 4-year-old sedan. The yellow dome light illuminated the crumpled ticket in my trembling hand. All 6 numbers matched perfectly. The prize amount listed for matching the entire sequence was printed clearly at the bottom of the ticket. $50 million. My mother had wanted to hand me a public humiliation. Instead, she had just handed me the financial equivalent of a nuclear warhead. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time. The yellow dome light cast long shadows across the dashboard. Most people who discover they hold a winning lottery ticket experience a visceral reaction. They scream, they pound the steering wheel, they call their best friend, or post a cryptic celebratory status on social media. I did none of those things. I just stared at the small rectangular slip of paper. $50 million. The structural reality of my universe shifted in the span of 30 seconds. The paper was cheap. It felt rough against my thumb, but the leverage it represented was heavy. Until tonight, my forensic accounting skills were my only defense mechanism. I could find the truth, but I lacked the capital to enforce it. The funds sitting in the palm of my hand were not a sports car or a beach house. They were a shield for Grandpa Wyatt. This was the sword that would sever my brother's parasitic grip on our family legacy. The screen of my smartphone illuminated the dark cabin of my car. A text message notification popped up. The sender was Brenda, my mother. I opened the message. The text read, "Savannah, you left a water ring on the oak dining table near the patio doors. Please be more mindful of the furniture next time you are here. Good night." I read the words twice. 10 minutes ago, a message like that would have stung. It was the classic parental tactic of highlighting a minor flaw to diminish a person's worth. She wanted to ensure I went to sleep feeling careless and inadequate. I looked from the glowing screen to the winning Mega Millions ticket resting on my lap. The juxtaposition was almost poetic. My mother was lecturing me about condensation on a table while she was blind to the $300,000 of stolen equity her golden son had funneled out of her father's estate. I did not type a defense. I did not apologize. I tapped the keyboard and sent a single-word reply. Noted. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. The emotional tether they held over me snapped. They could not hurt me anymore. I turned the dome light off. The darkness felt comforting. My mind switched from shock into strict analytical mode. If I marched into the State Lottery Commission tomorrow morning to claim the prize, my name would become public record. My father would see it on the evening news. Brandon would instantly pivot his strategy. He would play the role of the devoted brother, asking for a small loan to cover his temporary setbacks. If I refused, they would weaponize the extended family against me, painting me as a greedy, ungrateful daughter. They would find a way to manipulate Grandpa Wyatt before I could legally secure the ranch. I needed strict, impenetrable anonymity. Texas law permits lottery winners of certain thresholds to claim their prizes through a trust or an anonymous limited liability company. I needed a legal architect who specialized in high net worth asset protection. I pulled my laptop from my work bag in the back seat and opened it on the steering wheel. I connected to my mobile hotspot and began researching top-tier trust attorneys. I did not look in Dallas. Dallas was my father territory. He knew too many bankers and golf course lawyers there. I focused my search on Austin. The state capital was 3 hours away. It was a hub for ruthless corporate litigation and discreet wealth management. I cross-referenced state bar records and financial publications. By 2 in the morning, I had identified my target, a senior partner at a firm known for unyielding client confidentiality and strict asset defense. I drafted an email requesting an immediate, urgent consultation. I closed the laptop. The timeline was crucial. Brandon and my parents were scheduled to leave for their Caribbean cruise in exactly 10 days. Once that luxury liner left the Galveston port, they would be floating in international waters. Their cell phone reception would be sporadic. Their ability to execute legal documents or access mainland bank branches would be zero. The cruise was supposed to be their smokescreen. Instead, it was going to be their prison. I had 10 days to establish the anonymous trust claim, the jackpot, clear the funds, and execute the buyout of the predatory loan encumbering the Hill Country Ranch. I would let them board that ship thinking they had won. I would let them toast to their fake success while I dismantled their fraudulent empire brick by brick. I did not sleep that night. I drove back to my apartment, showered, and changed into a sharp-tailored charcoal suit. It was the exact suit I wore when testifying as an expert witness in federal court. I packed the forged mortgage documents, my laptop, and the lottery ticket into a secure leather briefcase. Before the sun rose over the Texas horizon, I was already on the interstate driving south toward Austin. The highway was empty. The tires hummed against the asphalt. For the first time in my life, I was not driving toward an obligation dictated by my parents. I was driving toward my own autonomy. The city of Austin emerged in the distance as the morning sky turned a pale shade of pink. Glass and steel towers reflected the early light. I navigated the downtown grid and pulled into the underground parking garage of a premium commercial high-rise. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent. The doors slid open to reveal a sprawling lobby lined with imported marble and frosted glass. A receptionist sat behind a sleek mahogany desk. I gripped the handle of my briefcase, feeling the weight of the evidence inside. I squared my shoulders and adjusted my jacket. I was no longer the invisible daughter folding napkins at a patio party. I walked through those double-glass doors, leaving my old life behind. The game had fundamentally changed, and it was time to meet the lawyer who would help me deal the final hand. The receptionist led me into a corner office overlooking the Colorado River. Victor stood behind a sleek glass desk. He was a man in his late 50s with sharp features and a tailored charcoal suit. Victor was well known in corporate legal circles as a financial shark. He did not help people build wealth. He protected vast fortunes from creditors and greedy relatives. I sat in the leather chair opposite him and placed my briefcase on the floor. I reached into my jacket pocket and slid the winning Mega Millions ticket across the polished mahogany surface. Victor looked at the printed numbers. He opened his laptop and pulled up the official drawing results on his monitor. He compared the sequences in silence. He did not smile or offer exaggerated congratulations. He simply nodded, indicating he understood the gravity of the slip of paper. We spent the next 2 hours drafting the precise architecture of my anonymity. Texas legislation permits lottery winners of certain cash thresholds to remain nameless if they claim their prize through specific corporate entities. We established a limited liability company right there in his office. I named the entity the Wyatt Shield Group. Victor drafted the articles of incorporation, naming himself as the registered corporate agent. My identity would remain buried under impenetrable layers of attorney-client privilege. Once the legal paperwork was signed and notarized, I handed him the physical ticket. He locked the paper inside a biometric wall safe. The state commission would process the payout within 7 business days. The funds would hit the new trust account shortly after. But securing the capital was only the first phase of my strategy. I needed to map the exact trajectory of the stolen ranch equity. While Victor handled the lottery commission bureaucracy, I initiated the forensic pursuit. I walked out of the towering law firm and dialed a secure number I kept buried in my phone contacts. The man on the other end was Elias. He was a former federal financial investigator who now operated in the private corporate sector. Elias specialized in untangling offshore shell companies and dark money transfers. He owed me a substantial favor from a corporate embezzlement case we collaborated on 3 years prior. I provided him with the routing numbers I had photographed from the forged mortgage documents inside my father's study. I instructed him to follow the digital trail of the $300,000. I needed to know exactly where Brandon deposited the stolen cash. Elias promised to deliver a preliminary dossier by the following afternoon. I checked into an understated business hotel near the state capitol building. I needed a quiet base of operations away from my regular apartment and my family prying eyes. I sat at the small desk near the wide window and opened my laptop to begin drafting flowcharts. My smartphone buzzed against the wooden nightstand. I picked the device up and saw a new social media notification. Jessica had tagged me in an online post. I opened the application. The bright image displayed Jessica standing in her pristine modern kitchen back in Dallas. She was holding a designer shopping bag and smiling radiantly at the camera lens. The caption beneath her photo read, "Holiday shopping requires careful planning and smart budgeting. Tagging my sweet sister-in-law Savannah so she can learn how to stretch her pennies this season. Always happy to share my financial wisdom with family." It was a calculated public insult. She wanted her followers to view her as a generous, affluent mentor and me as a struggling charity case. I stared at the photo. Her diamond rings sparkled under the expensive artificial kitchen lights. I knew those rings were funded by her husband, predatory deceit. A year ago, a post like this would have ruined my afternoon. Now it just felt pathetic. I did not type a bitter response in the comment section. I did not report the picture or block her profile. I locked the screen and set the phone face down on the desk. Her artificial digital prestige meant nothing compared to the $50 million clearing into my trust account. I ignored her mockery and returned to my forensic spreadsheets. The next afternoon, my encrypted email inbox chimed. Elias had delivered the requested financial intelligence. I downloaded the attached dossier and opened the secure PDF file. As a trained forensic accountant, I read bank ledgers the way musicians read sheet music. I looked for the rhythm of the transactions. The rhythm of my brother's finances was frantic and deeply criminal. Brandon had not simply lost the loan money in bad cryptocurrency trades or failed market investments. Those were the convenient excuses he fed my father to justify the mounting debts. The reality documented by Elias was far more sinister. The bank records revealed a complex web of wire transfers. Brandon routed the initial $300,000 through a domestic holding company registered in Delaware. From there, he segmented the cash into smaller, untraceable fractions. Those fragments were rapidly wired into an offshore banking account located in the Cayman Islands. He was practicing a textbook money laundering technique called layering. Brandon was not trying to save his failing wealth management firm. He was actively hiding stolen assets. He was liquidating his grandfather's legacy to build a secret, untouchable nest egg outside the legal jurisdiction of the United States. And he was doing it while letting his own family face the impending consequences. I scrolled down to the final page of the investigative dossier. My blood ran cold. Elias had pulled the public property records for the Hill Country Ranch. The shadow lender who issued the predatory loan had already filed a formal notice of default with the county clerk. Brandon had intentionally missed the first 2 balloon payments to accelerate the process. The lender was preparing to initiate formal foreclosure proceedings. If the outstanding balance was not satisfied, the financial group would seize the 300 acres of land. Grandpa Wyatt would be evicted from the home he built with his own hands. The legal notice stipulated a strict deadline. The grace period expired in exactly 14 days. My timeline suddenly tightened like a noose. My parents and Brandon were scheduled to leave for their lavish Caribbean cruise in exactly 10 days. Once they boarded that luxury liner, they would have limited internet access and zero physical ability to intervene in mainland affairs. That was their plan all along. They wanted Grandpa Wyatt isolated and distracted while the bank took the ranch. I closed the dossier and stared out the hotel window at the Austin skyline. The ticking clock was now established. I had 10 days to clear the lottery funds, pay off the predatory loan, and transfer the property deed into an ironclad trust. I had to build a flawless trap before they set sail. The forgotten daughter was about to become the architect of their total ruin. I left the Austin city limits behind and drove west into the Texas Hill Country. The landscape shifted from sleek glass corporate towers to rugged limestone bluffs and sprawling fields of dry brush. This was the environment that shaped my grandfather. Wyatt Hall was 78 years old. He possessed a profound understanding of patience and physical labor. He spent his youth clearing rocks from the soil and mending wire fences under the relentless summer sun. He built a legacy on tangible things. My father, Richard, grew up on that same land, but he despised the dirt. Richard spent his entire adult life chasing the polished, artificial prestige of country clubs and suburban mansions. He wanted the appearance of wealth without the grueling sacrifice required to sustain it. That fundamental difference in character was the root of our current family nightmare. I pulled my sedan into the gravel parking lot of a rustic diner situated on the edge of the county line. The establishment was a local institution featuring weathered wooden siding and a neon sign buzzing above the entrance. I grabbed my leather briefcase from the passenger seat and walked inside. The diner smelled of dark roast coffee and fried bacon. The morning rush had faded, leaving only a few patrons scattered among the red vinyl booths. I spotted Grandpa Wyatt sitting in a corner booth near the back window. He wore a faded denim shirt and a worn Stetson rested on the bench beside him. He stared out the glass, holding a thick ceramic mug in his calloused hands. I slid into the booth across from him. He turned his head and offered a warm, familiar smile. It was the only genuine smile I ever received from anyone sharing my last name. "Good morning, Savannah," he said. His voice was deep and gravelly. "You look sharp today. Working a big case." "You could say that," I replied. I ordered a black coffee from the waitress passing by our table. I waited until she filled my mug and walked out of earshot before I unlatched the brass clasps on my briefcase. "Grandpa, I need to show you something," I said, keeping my tone even and clinical. "I need you to look at these files, and I need you to remain calm." Wyatt set his mug down. The lines around his eyes deepened. He recognized the professional cadence in my voice. He knew I only used that specific tone when I uncovered corporate malfeasance. I pulled the thick manila folder from my bag and laid it flat on the Formica table. I opened the cover, revealing the high-resolution photographs I printed from my hotel room. I slid the image of the secondary mortgage contract across the table. "I found this inside Richard's study on Thanksgiving," I explained. "It details a secondary loan taken out against your ranch, $300,000. The interest rate is predatory." Wyatt stared at the paper. He did not gasp or clutch his chest. He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out his reading glasses, and slid them onto his face. He leaned forward, inspecting the numbers printed on the page. His broad shoulders grew incredibly rigid. I slid the final page across the table, showing the signature line. "This is the notary page," I continued softly. "Someone signed your name to execute the lien." Wyatt reached out and traced the blue ink signature with his index finger. His rough skin hovered over the loops and slants of the forged letters. The diner was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I watched his jaw tighten. The silence stretching between us was heavier than any shout or scream. He did not ask if I was sure. He did not accuse me of fabricating the evidence to spite my brother. Wyatt possessed a very sharp intuition regarding human nature, Richard Wyatt stated. It was not a question, it was a realization. Richard facilitated the paperwork, but the funds went to Brandon, I clarified. I pulled the offshore wire transfer dossier Elias had provided and placed it on the table. Brandon routed the stolen equity through a domestic shell company and wired it to an untouchable account in the Cayman Islands. He is hiding the money. And they are using the Caribbean cruise to keep you isolated while the shadow lender initiates foreclosure on the acreage. Wyatt removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked older in that moment than I had ever seen him. A deep, quiet heartbreak washed over his features. My son always looked for the shortcut, Wyatt murmured, staring out the window at the empty highway. Even when he was a boy, he would cheat on his chores just to get back to the television. I thought he would outgrow the selfishness. I never imagined he would steal the ground right out from under my feet to cover his boy mistakes. We can stop them, I said, leaning forward. We can freeze the asset and lock them out of the property forever. But I cannot do it without your legal authorization. I opened the secondary compartment of my briefcase and retrieved a pristine legal document drafted by Victor, my trust attorney. It was a comprehensive financial power of attorney. I am not going to confront them right now, I explained to my grandfather. Confrontation gives them time to react and lie. I need to move in the shadows. If you sign this document, you grant me total legal authority to manage your estate, handle your banking, and execute real estate transactions on your behalf. I will use this authority to shield the ranch from the shadow lender. Wyatt looked down at the legal contract. He did not ask how I planned to pay off a $300,000 predatory debt. He did not ask about my strategy. He just looked at me. You are the only person in this bloodline who understands the value of hard work, Savannah, Wyatt said. His voice carried an unshakable certainty. You always have been. He picked up a pen from the table and signed his name at the bottom of the document, his real signature. Blocky, rigid, and leaning sharply to the left. We walked next door to a local bank branch where a public notary witnessed and stamped the document, making my control over his financial estate undeniable. I secured the signed paperwork inside my briefcase. I had the legal authority to act. I just needed the precise account numbers Richard used to manage the fraudulent mortgage payments to ensure my payoff wire hit the correct institutional target. As we stood in the bank parking lot preparing to part ways, my smartphone began to vibrate in my jacket pocket. The caller identification displayed my mother name. I held up a finger to Wyatt, signaling him to wait. I swiped the screen and answered the call. Savannah Brenda barked through the speaker. She did not offer a greeting. She simply issued commands. Your father and I are finalizing our packing for the cruise. We leave for Galveston soon. I need you to come to the house twice a week while we are gone. What for? I asked, maintaining a flat monotone pitch. The orchids in the solarium need a specific watering schedule, Brenda stated, her tone dripping with entitlement. And we have several holiday packages arriving. I do not want boxes sitting on the porch, ruining the curb appeal. You will need to bring the mail inside and sort it on the kitchen island. Do not misplace anything. I will leave the security code and the spare key under the ceramic frog near the side entrance. The irony was staggering. My mother was treating me like an unpaid domestic servant. She thought she was establishing dominance. She had no idea she was handing me the final key to their total ruin. I needed access to Richard's incoming mail to intercept the formal banking statements regarding the shadow lender. Brenda was willingly bypassing her own home security system for me, just so she would not have to hire a neighborhood teenager to water her precious flowers. Yes, Mother, I replied. I will collect the mail and tend to the house. Enjoy your vacation. I terminated the call and looked at Grandpa Wyatt. The corners of my mouth twitched upward, forming a cold, calculated smile. They are giving me the keys to the castle, I told him. Go back to the ranch. Turn off your telephone. Do not answer the door for anyone carrying legal envelopes. Give me 5 days. 4 days later, the Hall family embarked on their lavish tropical voyage. They posted dozens of pictures online standing on the deck of the luxury liner holding expensive cocktails. Once the ship left the Texas coastline, their cellular service vanished. I drove my Honda into the wealthy enclave of Highland Park and parked directly in the center of their circular driveway. I retrieved the spare key from under the ceramic frog and punched the security code into the alarm panel. The heavy oak door swung open. The house was dead quiet. I walked straight past the solarium, ignoring the orchids entirely. I approached the massive marble kitchen island. A thick pile of accumulated mail rested on the counter exactly where Brenda instructed me to put it. I sorted through the glossy catalogs, the charity solicitations, and the utility bills. Then I found it. A thick envelope bearing a red certified stamp. The return address belonged to the private equity group that issued the predatory loan. I tore the envelope open. I scanned the formal legal jargon printed on the heavy bond paper. It was an accelerated foreclosure warning notice. Brandon had defaulted again. The grace period was officially over. The shadow lender was initiating the final asset seizure protocol. The outstanding balance, including severe penalty fees, was now $315,000. I memorized the lender routing number and the specific account identification code printed at the top of the notice. The house of cards was not just wobbling, it was actively collapsing, and my father and brother were floating somewhere in the Caribbean, entirely blind to the impending impact. I pulled out my phone and dialed Victor Direct Line. "The target is locked," I told the attorney. "Initiate the payoff wire transfer from the trust." The ultimate financial checkmate was officially in motion. I stood in the center of my parents' pristine kitchen, holding the formal foreclosure notice. My attorney Victor had already received my authorization. The wire transfer to satisfy the predatory debt was processing. The ranch was safe, but my work was far from over. A forensic accountant never stops at the surface layer of a financial crime. We follow the capital until it stops moving. Brandon had routed $300,000 to the Cayman Islands, but offshore accounts are merely holding pens. Criminals do not steal money just to look at a digital balance on a computer screen. They steal money to spend it. I opened my laptop on the cool marble island and accessed the encrypted file Elias provided. I began cross-referencing the offshore routing numbers against domestic expenditure logs. I spent hours analyzing the data streams. I looked for anomalies the way a doctor looks for a fracture on an X-ray. By the time the sun set over the Dallas suburbs, I found the leak. The offshore trust was executing automated monthly wire transfers back into the United States. Exactly $12,000 moved on the first day of every month. The destination was a regional bank branch located in downtown Austin. I accessed a subscription database utilized by private investigators to trace the destination routing number. The receiving account belonged to a premier real estate management group. They owned a portfolio of ultra-luxury high-rise apartments overlooking the Colorado River. I needed to know exactly what Brandon was leasing. I utilized a backdoor public records registry to pull the tenant manifest for the residential building. Unit 4200, a penthouse suite. The primary guarantor listed on the lease agreement was Brandon Hall. But Brandon did not live in Austin. He lived in a sprawling suburban home in Dallas with Jessica. I pulled the secondary tenant information associated with the penthouse. The screen loaded a single first name and last name, Vanessa Sterling. I ran a background check on the individual. She was a 24-year-old aspiring socialite with a heavy internet presence. I pulled up her public social media profiles. The screen filled with high-resolution images of a young woman posing on a private balcony. The Austin skyline gleamed behind her in the twilight. She wore expensive designer clothing and flashed diamond tennis bracelets at the camera. I recognized the jewelry instantly. It was the exact same brand Jessica wore to our Thanksgiving dinner. The deepest layer of my brother's betrayal unspooled before my eyes. He was not just a failing wealth manager trying to cover bad market bets. He was actively funding a double life. He was paying for a luxury penthouse and a mistress using the stolen equity from our grandfather legacy. He hijacked Wyatt's sweat and blood to finance an illusion for a woman a decade his junior. I leaned back on the kitchen stool. The sheer audacity of the crime was breathtaking. Brandon was living like a billionaire while his own grandfather stood inches away from eviction. He possessed zero remorse. And the most tragic element of this entire scenario was Jessica. I thought back to the text message my sister-in-law sent me just 24 hours prior. It was the eve of their cruise departure. They were frantically packing their designer luggage when my phone chimed. "Hey, Savannah," Jessica had written. "Brandon has been working such grueling hours trying to close deals and provide for us. He is so stressed, he forgot to pick up his tailored suits from the dry cleaner on Oaklawn Avenue. We do not have time before our flight to Galveston. Be a dear and grab them for us while we are gone so they are ready for his next board meeting." I sat in my apartment that evening staring at the glowing screen. The dramatic irony was so thick it felt suffocating. Jessica paraded Brandon around family events like a prize-winning stallion. She posted endless photos boasting about his relentless work ethic and their pristine marriage. She truly believed her husband was exhausted from conquering the financial markets. She had no idea his exhaustion came from maintaining a secret penthouse 3 hours south. I had driven to the upscale Dallas dry cleaner the following morning just hours before their ship left the port. The bell chimed as I walked into the crisp air-conditioned lobby. I handed the clerk my credit card and paid the $80 cleaning tab. The clerk retrieved 3 pristine suits wrapped in clear protective plastic. I carried the expensive garments to my Honda and laid them carefully across the back seat. I looked at the imported Italian wool through the rearview mirror. I knew Jessica was a shallow, status-obsessed woman who enjoyed mocking my modest lifestyle. She had gleefully insulted me over a $2 lottery ticket. But standing in that parking lot, I felt a strange, cold pity for her. She was a victim of the very man she worshipped. She was defending a ghost. Her entire identity was tied to a husband who was funneling their future into another woman's bank account. I returned my focus to the laptop screen glowing on my parents' kitchen island. I had every piece of the puzzle. The financial picture was flawless. It was time to build the weapon. I created a new digital folder on my desktop. I named it The Reckoning. I dragged the high-resolution photographs of the forged secondary mortgage into the folder. I added the official bank notice proving the shadow lender was initiating foreclosure. I uploaded the offshore wire transfer logs Elias secured. I downloaded the lease agreement for the Austin penthouse, highlighting both Brandon and Vanessa's signatures in bright yellow. Finally, I added a screenshot of Jessica's text message pleading for me to pick up his suits because he was working so hard. I encrypted the entire dossier with a military-grade password. The storm was fully prepared. I closed the laptop and slipped it into my leather briefcase. I looked around the silent Highland Park mansion. The expensive artwork hung on the walls. The custom furniture sat perfectly staged. It was a house built entirely on lies and unearned arrogance. My parents and my brother believed they had engineered the perfect crime. They believed they had exiled the only family member smart enough to catch them. They were currently floating somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, drinking expensive champagne and toasting to their brilliance. They had no cellular reception. They had no escape route. I picked up my briefcase and walked out the front door, locking the deadbolt behind me. I stepped into the warm Texas night air. The forgotten daughter was gone. The architect of truth was ready to strike. The evening before my parents and brother drove down to the Galveston port, they insisted on a grand send-off dinner. The venue was a premier steakhouse located in the heart of downtown Dallas. It was the kind of restaurant featuring mahogany-paneled walls, low ambient lighting, and waiters wearing pristine white gloves. Richard selected the location because it projected the exact image he craved. He wanted to sit in a tufted leather booth surrounded by wealthy oil executives and pretend he belonged in their elite ranks. I arrived 10 minutes early and waited near the brass host stand. I wore a simple black dress. My demeanor was calm. The encrypted digital dossier containing their entire criminal footprint sat securely on a small flash drive inside my purse. My family walked through the heavy glass revolving doors right on time. Brandon strutted into the lavish lobby wearing a tailored Italian sports coat, looking like a man without a single care in the world. He adjusted a thick silver watch on his wrist, checking the time with exaggerated importance. Jessica clung to his arm, carrying a designer handbag she bought specifically to celebrate the impending tropical vacation. Brenda and Richard followed close behind them. They greeted me with polite indifference. The hostess gathered a stack of leather-bound menus and escorted us to a private circular booth near the back of the dining room, away from the noisy bar. As soon as we sat down, Brandon took control of the evening. He did not ask anyone else what they wanted to drink or wait to see the cocktail menu. He waved the sommelier over with a flick of his wrist and requested a vintage reserve champagne. He named a specific French label that cost more than most working-class citizens earned in a week. "We have a lot to celebrate tonight," Brandon declared, leaning back against the comfortable leather cushion. 14 days of pristine ocean views and 0 professional responsibilities. I am turning my phone off the second we board that ship. Jessica giggled and rested her head on his shoulder. "I am so ready to unplug," she sighed, playing with the stem of her empty water glass. Brandon has been working so hard lately. He spends every night at the office closing deals. He deserves a break from the brutal corporate grind. I picked up my water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. I looked across the wide table at my older brother. The disconnect between his projected reality and his actual circumstances was staggering. He was sitting in a luxury Dallas steakhouse while owing hundreds of thousands of dollars to a ruthless shadow lender. He was actively financing an illicit penthouse for a younger woman in Austin 3 hours away. Yet his pulse remained steady. He possessed the terrifying ability to compartmentalize his deceit. He smiled at his wife without a single trace of guilt. The waiter brought the chilled green bottle and poured the sparkling liquid into tall crystal flutes. They raised their glasses in a synchronized cheerful toast. I lifted my water glass, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. The dinner proceeded with courses of dry-aged beef and expensive side dishes. Richard spent the meal boasting about his country club handicap, while Brenda criticized the outfits of other patrons walking past our table. When the dinner concluded 2 hours later, the waiter returned holding a sleek black leather folder containing the final bill. Brandon patted the pockets of his sports coat. His brow furrowed in a display of highly practiced confusion. "Oh man," Brandon said, shaking his head in mock frustration. I left my wallet in the center console of the Range Rover. I was in such a rush to get inside and secure our table. "Do you mind getting this one, Dad? I will transfer the funds to your account tomorrow morning before we board the ship." Richard waved his hand dismissively, acting the part of the benevolent, wealthy patriarch. "Do not worry about it, son," Richard replied, pulling a heavy platinum credit card from his blazer pocket. "Consider it an early vacation treat from me and your mother. You save your cash for the casino tables on the cruise." Brandon grinned and looked across the dining table at me. His eyes gleamed with that familiar, condescending spark. "Hey, Savannah." Brandon chuckled, leaning forward slightly. "Are you sure you do not want to cover the gratuity? Maybe that $2 lottery ticket Mom gave you on Thanksgiving finally paid off. It might cover the valet parking fee outside if you are lucky." Brenda let out a sharp laugh. Jessica smiled, hiding her mouth behind her linen napkin. They waited for me to flush with deep embarrassment. They expected me to shrink into the shadows of the leather booth. I placed my hands gently on my lap. I felt the smooth surface of my purse where the digital evidence rested. I knew the exact verified balance of the trust account Victor managed in Austin. I possessed the liquid capital to purchase the entire restaurant, fire the arrogant staff, and turn the historic building into a vacant parking lot. I did not need to defend my pride against a man currently facing federal wire fraud. I offered a serene, polite smile. "I think I will hold on to my $2, I replied, keeping my tone soft and unbothered. "You never know when luck will change." The waiter processed the transaction and returned the platinum card. As we stood up to leave the dining room, I decided to test the structural integrity of my father conscience one final time. I needed to look him in the eye and give him a chance to tell the truth. We walked out onto the pavement under the glowing streetlights. The valet pulled their leased luxury vehicles up to the curb, leaving the engines running. "Hey, Dad," I said, pausing near the passenger door of his sedan. I was thinking about Grandpa Wyatt earlier today. How is the Hill Country Ranch doing? I know county property taxes are due soon and the winter maintenance can be expensive. Richard did not flinch. He adjusted his silk tie and offered a reassuring fatherly nod. Everything is perfectly fine, Savannah, he stated smoothly. I am managing the property taxes and the estate upkeep myself. Your grandfather does not have to worry about a single financial burden. I have the whole situation under control. You just focus on your little accounting job and let me handle the big family assets. I stared into his eyes. He was lying to his own daughter about stealing her grandfather's legacy, and he did it without a single stutter or nervous blink. That lie was the final nail. I felt any lingering hesitation dissolve into the cool night air. I mentally sealed their fate. Have a wonderful trip, I told them, stepping back from the idling vehicle. Enjoy the ocean. Make sure you take plenty of pictures. Brandon honked the horn of his luxury SUV and sped off toward the highway. Richard and Brenda followed close behind, heading south toward the Texas coast. I stood on the sidewalk watching their red taillights disappear into the busy downtown traffic. They were driving straight into an inescapable trap they built themselves. The next morning, I woke up early and opened my laptop on my kitchen counter. I pulled up a specialized maritime tracking website. I entered the specific vessel name listed on their printed cruise itinerary. The digital map displayed a glowing green icon representing the luxury liner docked in port. At 4 in the afternoon, the icon began to move. The enormous ship pulled away from the Galveston port and navigated toward the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico. I sat at my island watching the screen intently. I waited for the digital marker to cross the invisible boundary line designating international waters. Once the ship passed that specific nautical mile marker, their cellular service vanished. They were now isolated in a floating metal box with limited expensive internet access and zero control over the mainland narrative. They could not execute legal documents. They could not visit a bank branch. They could not intervene in any financial maneuvers back home. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct number for my attorney. Victor answered on the first ring. The ship has left the port, I instructed the lawyer, keeping my voice crisp and authoritative. Execute the maneuver. Victor typed rapidly on his keyboard. The rhythmic clicking sound echoed through the receiver. The wire transfer is initiated, Victor confirmed. $315,000 is en route to the private equity group. The predatory loan is satisfied in full. I am filing the legal paperwork with the county clerk to transfer the ranch deed into the irrevocable trust right now. Your grandfather is protected. Richard and Brandon are permanently locked out of the asset. I ended the call and set the phone down next to my coffee mug. The Hill Country Ranch was safe. Grandpa Wyatt's legacy was secure against their greed. The protective phase of my overarching strategy was officially complete. Now it was time to ignite the offensive phase. The first 3 days of the Caribbean cruise proceeded exactly as my parents intended. They posted dozens of pictures to their social media accounts, using the expensive satellite internet package my father purchased. There were images of Brandon holding tropical cocktails by the infinity pool. There were videos of Jessica displaying her new resort wardrobe during elegant formal dinners. They wanted the world to witness their prosperity. They wanted everyone back in Dallas to believe their financial empire was thriving. They had no idea their curated digital reality was about to shatter. I spent those 3 days sitting on the expansive wooden porch of Grandpa Wyatt Hill Country Ranch. The environment was the exact opposite of a crowded luxury liner. The air smelled of cedar and dry earth. Wyatt spent his mornings repairing a wooden fence near the southern pasture. I sat in a heavy rocking chair, working on my laptop, monitoring the final legal transfers Victor executed in Austin. The property deed was secure. The shadow lender was gone. The defensive wall was impenetrable. I just needed a catalyst to initiate the offensive strike. That catalyst arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, courtesy of the Texas State Lottery Commission. Victor filed the official claim paperwork naming the Wyatt Shield Group as the sole beneficiary of the $50 million jackpot. The state bureaucracy processed the documents and released a mandatory press statement confirming the prize had been claimed by an anonymous corporate entity. The press release contained very little information to protect my identity. But the state commission always releases the specific retail location where the winning ticket was printed. It proves the integrity of the game to the public. A local Dallas news station immediately dispatched a field reporter to cover the story. They broadcasted a live segment from the parking lot of a quick-stop convenience store located precisely 2 blocks away from my parents' Highland Park estate. The reporter stood in front of the sliding glass doors holding a microphone. She interviewed the store manager, who confirmed a wealthy local woman had purchased the ticket on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. I was not watching the news broadcast, but Aunt Caroline was. Caroline is my father's older sister. She is a woman who possesses no actual hobbies or interests outside of monitoring the personal failures of her extended family. She attends every holiday dinner, baptism, and graduation strictly to gather conversational ammunition. Caroline treats gossip like a competitive sport. She was sitting in her living room when the local news segment aired. She saw the familiar quick-stop convenience store. She heard the date of purchase. Her mind instantly traveled back to the Thanksgiving patio. She remembered Brenda reaching into her designer cardigan and handing me a frayed, crumpled $2 ticket with a mocking smirk. Caroline did not call me to verify her theory. That would ruin the dramatic reveal. She went straight to the extended family group chat containing over 30 relatives. I was sitting on the ranch porch holding a glass of iced sweet tea when my smartphone vibrated against the rustic wooden table. The screen illuminated. A text message notification appeared from Caroline. Did anyone else just see the Dallas local news? Caroline typed. The winning Mega Millions ticket was bought at the Quick Stop near Richard House right before Thanksgiving. Brenda, is that the same ticket you gave Savannah as a joke? The digital silence that followed that text message lasted exactly 4 minutes. I took a slow sip of my tea. I listened to the wind rustling through the old oak trees in the yard. I knew exactly what was happening hundreds of miles away in the middle of the ocean. My parents and brother were likely sitting in a dining hall or lounging on a sun deck connected to the ship's satellite network. They saw the notification. The realization struck them. The joke they used to humiliate the invisible workhorse was actually worth $50 million. My phone vibrated again, then it vibrated 3 more times in rapid succession. The screen lit up with incoming calls. First, it was Brenda. The caller identification flashed her name in bright letters. The device buzzed against the wood, sliding slightly toward the edge of the table. I did not reach for it. I let the call go to the automated voicemail system. Seconds later, Richard called, then Brandon, then Jessica. The incoming calls cascaded down my screen in a relentless, desperate wave. 5 missed calls, then 20 missed calls. The device grew warm from the constant incoming signal processing. 50 missed calls. The notifications stacked on top of each other, creating a solid wall of digital panic. I sat back in the rocking chair and watched the glowing rectangle. A weaker person would have answered the phone immediately to gloat. They would have screamed through the receiver demanding apologies for years of mistreatment. But true power does not require screaming. True power is forcing your abusers to confront the consequences of their actions in a vacuum of silence. I waited an entire hour. The missed call counter hit 115. The battery indicator dropped to 20%. When the incoming calls finally paused, I picked up the device and accessed my voicemail inbox. There were 30 new audio messages. I pressed play on the first recording. It was Brenda. Her tone was light, sweet, and entirely probing. Savannah, honey, it is Mom. Aunt Caroline just saw the craziest coincidence on the local news. Give me a ring when you get a chance. Your father and I just want to check in and see how you are doing back home. Love you. I deleted the message and skipped forward. The tone shifted rapidly as the hours passed, and I continued to ignore them. The artificial sweetness dissolved, exposing the raw panic underneath. Message 12 was from Richard. His voice was authoritative and demanding. Savannah, pick up the phone right now. This is family business. We need to discuss the legal implications of that ticket immediately. You should not be handling this kind of capital without my direct guidance. Call me back the second you hear this. I skipped to message 22. It was Brandon. He spoke in a hushed, sleazy whisper, sounding like a man hiding in a cruise ship bathroom away from his wife. Hey sis. Listen, I know we joke around sometimes, but you need someone who understands asset management right now. The government will take half of that money in taxes if you do not structure it correctly. Call me before you do anything stupid. We can build a phenomenal portfolio together. I pressed play on this final recording. It was Brenda again. The polite facade was gone. Her voice cracked with unhinged entitlement and greed. Savannah, you owe us. I bought that ticket with my own money. I picked those numbers. Half of that jackpot belongs to this family. You are being incredibly selfish by ignoring your mother. Pick up the phone right now. I lowered the device and looked out across the rugged Texas landscape. My mother believed she was entitled to the wealth she threw away as an insult. My father believed he still held the authority to command my obedience. My brother believed he could manipulate me into funding his shadow empire. They were trapped in a metal box floating in international waters, driven mad by the knowledge that the daughter they discarded held the keys to a kingdom they could not reach. They thought this was just about a lottery ticket. They thought the $50 million was the big reveal. They had no idea the money was merely the spotlight I was turning on to expose the deep structural rot of their entire existence. I opened the messaging application and navigated to the specific group chat containing Richard, Brenda, Brandon, and Jessica. I did not address their frantic voicemails. I did not mention the money. I typed a single precise sentence. I will video call you tonight at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. Have everyone in the room. I hit send. I locked the screen and slid the phone into my pocket. The catalyst of chaos had detonated perfectly. The anticipation would slowly torture them for the next 6 hours. The stage was set for the ultimate reckoning. The afternoon sun sank lower over the Texas hill country, casting long, jagged shadows across the dry brush. The temperature dropped, bringing a crisp chill to the evening air. I remained seated on the rustic wooden porch, holding my smartphone in my lap. Since I sent that single text message scheduling the video call, my device had gone entirely silent. The barrage of frantic missed calls and demanding voicemails ceased. I had given them a concrete directive and a specific timeline. That structured boundary forced them to pause their panic and wait. They were currently trapped in a state of suspended animation somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, holding their breath until 8 o'clock. I was not waiting. I was moving in the shadows, utilizing every passing second to solidify my legal fortress. At 5 in the evening, the screen of my laptop illuminated with an incoming encrypted call. It was Victor, my trust attorney, calling from his high-rise office in Austin. I answered the connection immediately. The transaction is finalized, Victor announced. His voice was crisp and devoid of unnecessary emotion, which is exactly why I hired him. The wire transfer from the Wyatt Shield Group cleared the Federal Reserve. $315,000 landed in the shadow lender receiving account an hour ago. The private equity group has officially acknowledged receipt of the funds and issued a formal release of lien. I let out a slow, measured breath. The predatory debt was gone. The immediate threat of foreclosure was vaporized. I just filed the secondary paperwork with the county clerk. Victor continued. The property deed is now housed within an ironclad, irrevocable trust. Your grandfather is named as the sole lifetime beneficiary. You are designated as the sole executor with supreme legal authority over the asset. I looked out at the rolling acreage stretching toward the horizon. My father Richard had always viewed this land as his personal uncashed lottery ticket. Throughout my childhood, I watched him walk these fence lines with a greedy glint in his eye, calculating the subdivision potential. He treated Wyatt's sweat and blood as a future inheritance he could liquidate the moment the old man passed away. Brandon inherited that exact same entitlement. They felt justified in stealing the equity because they believed the ranch already belonged to them. Victor drafted the trust to ensure that entitlement was permanently severed. An irrevocable trust in the state of Texas cannot be modified, amended, or terminated without the permission of the grantor. Furthermore, it removes the asset from the probate process entirely. Are Richard and Brandon legally locked out? I asked, needing to hear the verbal confirmation. They are ghosts, Savannah, Victor stated with a hint of grim satisfaction. They possess zero legal standing to challenge the trust. They cannot borrow against the land. They cannot inherit the property. If they step foot on the acreage without your explicit invitation, you hold the authority to have them arrested for criminal trespass. I am sending the digitized county confirmation stamp to your secure inbox right now. I thanked the attorney and terminated the connection. I opened my email and downloaded the finalized trust document. The red digital seal from the county clerk glowed on my screen. Grandpa Wyatt was safe. The defensive perimeter was sealed. I closed the laptop and picked up my smartphone to head inside. Before I could stand up, the device chimed. A new audio message had bypassed the cellular network through a maritime internet application. Brandon had apparently purchased a premium data package on the cruise ship just to bypass the standard reception blackout. I pressed play on the final recording. "Hey, Savannah," Brandon said. His voice was breathless, eager, and dripping with predatory charm. "I hear the connection clicking, so I know this might drop soon. Listen. I have been crunching numbers since Mom sent that text about the convenience store. $50 million is a staggering amount of liquid capital. But if you let it sit in standard accounts, the inflation rate and the government will eat you alive." I listened to the faint sound of ocean wind blowing through his microphone. He was standing on a balcony, isolating himself from his wife to make this pitch. "You need a sophisticated wealth management strategy." Brandon continued, his tone shifting into his practiced salesman cadence. "I was thinking we could partner up. We rebrand my firm, Hall and Hall Financial. You provide the foundational capital, and I utilize my elite client network to multiply the assets. It is the perfect synergy. You know how to audit the books, and I know how to close the deals. We could dominate the Dallas market. Call me right at 8 so we can discuss the corporate structure." I stopped the recording and deleted the audio file. The sheer sociopathic delusion required to leave that message was breathtaking. Brandon was currently defaulting on hundreds of thousands of dollars in shadow loans. He was actively maintaining a secret penthouse for a 24-year-old mistress using forged signatures. Yet he genuinely believed I would blindly hand him the keys to a $50 million fortune. He assumed I was still the naive, invisible sister eager for a scrap of validation from the golden child. He thought he could pivot from robbing our grandfather to exploiting me without missing a single step. I walked through the heavy wooden front door of the farmhouse. The interior smelled of old pine and wood smoke. Wyatt was asleep in his armchair in the living room, resting after a long day of physical labor. I moved quietly into the rustic kitchen. The space featured scuffed floorboards and a heavy oak dining table that had survived 4 decades of family meals. I set my laptop on the center of the table. I walked over to the counter and prepared the coffee maker. I measured the dark roast grounds, listening to the rhythmic drip of the hot water. The mundane physical action grounded me. I needed my heart rate slow and my mind perfectly sharp. I poured the dark, steaming liquid into a thick ceramic mug and returned to the oak table. I sat down and woke up the computer screen. A successful interrogation relies heavily on visual presentation. You do not just drop evidence on the table in a chaotic pile. You arrange it to maximize the psychological impact. I closed all unnecessary software programs and minimized my web browser. I wanted my desktop background to be entirely clean. I opened the encrypted folder labeled The Reckoning. I extracted 4 specific digital files and arranged them on the screen like chess pieces ready for deployment. In the top left corner, I placed the high-resolution photograph of the forged secondary mortgage, highlighting the fake signature in blue ink. In the top right corner, I positioned the offshore wire transfer logs, detailing the systematic funneling of the stolen equity into the Cayman Islands holding account. In the bottom left corner, I staged the residential lease agreement for the luxury penthouse in Austin. I made sure the document was zoomed in perfectly on the names Brandon Hall and Vanessa Sterling. In the bottom right corner, I placed the freshly stamped legal confirmation from the county clerk, proving the ranch was now locked inside an untouchable, irrevocable trust. 4 documents. 4 undeniable truths. I did not need to raise my voice or hurl insults. These digital files would do all the tearing and shredding for me. I checked the webcam preview on my monitor. I wore a simple charcoal gray sweater. My hair was pulled back into a neat professional knot. My facial expression was smooth and clinical, displaying the exact same stoic detachment I utilized during federal court depositions. I did not look like a vindictive sibling seeking petty revenge. I looked like an executioner ready to pull a lever. The antique grandfather clock standing in the hallway began to chime. The deep, resonant tolls echoed through the quiet farmhouse. 7:58, 7:59. I took one final sip of the dark coffee. 9. I took one final sip of the dark coffee. The heat bloomed in my chest. The clock struck 8. I moved my cursor across the screen, hovering over the digital meeting link I had generated earlier that afternoon. The cursor pulsed, waiting for the command. I took a slow breath in. I let the breath out. I clicked Join Meeting. The screen flickered black for a fraction of a second before the video feed stabilized. The contrast between my environment and theirs was stark. I sat in a dimly lit farmhouse kitchen, surrounded by weathered oak and silence. My monitor displayed a brightly lit luxury cruise suite, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark ocean. Richard, Brenda, Brandon, and Jessica were huddled together around a single laptop, sitting on a glass coffee table. They wore evening resort wear. Jessica had a tropical white flower tucked behind her ear. Brandon held a heavy crystal tumbler filled with amber liquor. Their faces were stretched into the most unnatural, predatory smiles I had ever witnessed. They looked like a pack of wolves greeting a lamb that had just wandered into their den. "There is our millionaire," Richard cheered. His voice echoed through the computer speakers, carrying a sickening level of manufactured warmth. I did not return the smile. I kept my posture rigid and my expression blank. "The Texas Lottery Commission processed the claim this morning," I stated. My tone was steady and clinical. "The Wyatt Shield Group is the legal recipient of the $50 million jackpot. The funds have cleared." The suite erupted into a chaotic chorus of unearned celebration. Brenda clapped her hands together, emitting a high-pitched squeal. Brandon leaned into the camera frame, pointing his index finger at the lens. "We knew it," Brandon boasted. "I told Dad we needed to structure a wealth management vehicle the second I heard the news. We can set up a family office right there in Dallas." "We have so much to plan," Brenda gushed, interrupting her son. "We can upgrade the Highland Park house. We can finally purchase that vacation property in Aspen. I knew that $2 ticket was a blessing. I just knew the universe was rewarding us." "Let us not get ahead of ourselves," Richard instructed, holding up a hand to quiet his wife and son. He adjusted his silk collar, adopting the role of the benevolent patriarch. "Savannah needs proper guidance. A sum like this requires an experienced hand to mitigate the tax burden and ensure generational wealth. We will sit down with my personal accountants the minute this ship docks." I let them talk. I let them outline how they intended to spend funds they would never touch. I let the silence stretch for 5 full seconds after Richard finished his decree. I watched their smiles falter slightly as the lack of my enthusiastic compliance registered in their minds. "We are not discussing my money," I said. I moved my mouse across the wooden table. I clicked the green presentation button located at the bottom of the video application. "Before we discuss anything else, let us discuss Grandpa Wyatt Ranch." The live digital feed of my face disappeared from their laptop monitor. It was instantly replaced by the high-resolution image of the secondary mortgage contract. I used my cursor to highlight the $300,000 loan amount at the top of the page. I scrolled down smoothly, stopping the screen directly on the forged blue ink signature at the bottom. The noise inside the luxury suite vanished. The silence that followed was not just quiet, it was a suffocating vacuum. I watched the live video feed of their faces grouped in the small corner thumbnail of my monitor. The manufactured warmth drained from Richard's cheeks. His skin turned a pale, sickly gray. Brandon lowered his crystal tumbler, resting it slowly on the glass coffee table. The arrogant swagger evaporated from his posture. He suddenly possessed the rigid, terrified stiffness of a cornered animal. Brenda squinted at the screen. She was not a financial expert. She did not immediately comprehend the legal jargon displayed before her. "What is this, Savannah?" she asked. Her voice faltered, losing its previous confident pitch. "Why are we looking at a loan document?" "That is a predatory lien," I explained, keeping my cadence slow and deliberate. "Your son and your husband secured a shadow loan using your father's property as collateral. They bypassed his consent by forging his signature on the final page. The document you are currently looking at is the exact reason Brandon suddenly acquired the capital to fund this Caribbean cruise." Jessica leaned closer to the laptop screen. Her manicured fingers gripped the edge of the glass coffee table so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Brandon," she whispered, turning her head to look at her husband. "What is she talking about? You told me the firm closed a major real estate deal. You said we were celebrating a record quarter." Richard snapped out of his paralysis. His old instincts flared to life. He tried to reclaim the narrative using the same tactics that had worked for 3 decades. "Turn the screen off, Savannah," he commanded, attempting to project his usual booming authority. "You are confused. You are misinterpreting standard corporate leverage. This is a private business matter between me and your brother. It is far too complex for you to understand." "I am a forensic accountant," I replied. My voice cut through his bluster like a scalpel. "I do not misinterpret data. I trace it. I know Brandon missed the final balloon payment. I know the shadow lender issued a formal notice of foreclosure to seize the 300 acres in the hill country. You planned this lavish vacation to keep Grandpa Wyatt isolated while the bank took his home." Brenda covered her mouth with her trembling hand. Her eyes darted back and forth between Richard and the forged document glowing on the monitor. "Richard." She breathed out the single word carrying a tone of rising horror. "Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me you did not wager my father land." Richard opened his mouth to formulate another lie, but I did not give him the oxygen required to speak. The $300,000 did not go into a failing wealth management firm. I continued pressing the forensic advantage. It was routed through a domestic shell company in Delaware and wired directly into an offshore account located in the Cayman Islands. Brandon finally spoke. His voice cracked, shedding all remnants of his country club charm. "You hacked my personal accounts. That is a federal crime, Savannah." "I did not hack anything," I corrected him. "I followed the trail of breadcrumbs you carelessly left behind on a desk. You are an amateur pretending to be a mastermind. You left a digital footprint wide enough for a novice investigator to follow." Jessica stood up from the sofa. She looked down at Brandon, her expression twisting from confusion into profound betrayal. The illusion of her pristine marriage was cracking under the weight of the undeniable evidence displayed on the screen. "You sent the money offshore?" Jessica asked, her pitch rising with genuine panic. "Why would you send it offshore if it was for the firm?" I watched the golden child scramble for a defense. I watched the patriarch fail to formulate an excuse. The foundation of their false reality was buckling. But I was not finished. The forged mortgage was merely the opening argument. The true devastation was still sitting in my encrypted folder waiting to be unleashed. Richard leaned forward until his face filled the majority of the camera frame. He was sweating now. A thin sheen of perspiration gathered on his forehead, reflecting the harsh artificial lighting of the cruise cabin. He lowered his voice, adopting the calm, reassuring tone of a seasoned executive managing a crisis. "Listen to me," Savannah, Richard instructed, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "You are taking isolated data points and drawing incorrect conclusions. The offshore account is a standard corporate tax shelter. Brandon and I established it to protect family assets from domestic inflation. It is a highly sophisticated strategy used by every major wealth management firm. You are an accountant, not an international tax attorney. You simply do not grasp the overarching financial architecture we are building." He was trying to gaslight me in front of an audience. It was the same tactic he used when I was a teenager. Whenever I noticed a flaw in his logic or caught him in a contradiction, he would question my intelligence and bury the truth under a mountain of condescension. I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice to defend my professional credentials. Debating a narcissist only provides them with the friction they need to keep the diversion alive. I moved my cursor to the bottom of the video application window. I hovered over the microphone icon and clicked it. The audio feed from the luxury suite cut out instantly. Richard continued speaking. His mouth moved rapidly, forming words I could no longer hear. Brandon stood behind him, nodding along in silent agreement, playing the role of the misunderstood genius. They looked absurd. They were pantomiming authority trapped behind a layer of muted glass. With the room silenced, I minimized the forged mortgage document. I opened the encrypted folder on my desktop and selected the final two files. I arranged them side by side on the shared screen, ensuring the text was large enough to read on their laptop monitor. On the left side of the screen, I displayed the banking logs Elias had secured. The ledger showed the automated monthly withdrawal of exactly $12,000 transferring from the Cayman Islands account back into the United States. On the right side of the screen, I displayed the 50-page residential lease agreement for the luxury penthouse located in downtown Austin. I highlighted the monthly rental rate in bright yellow, $12,000. I scrolled down to the signature page. I highlighted the two names printed at the bottom of the legal contract, Brandon Hall and Vanessa Sterling. Jessica had spent her entire adult life running from a working-class upbringing she desperately wanted to erase. She met Brandon at a charity gala, posing as a wealthy debutante while carrying crippling credit card debt to afford her designer dresses. She married him because he represented the ultimate safety net. He was her ticket into the gated communities and exclusive country clubs of Highland Park. Her entire identity rested on the foundation of his promised wealth. I moved my cursor and unmuted the microphone. The audio feed from the suite reconnected just in time to capture the exact moment that foundation disintegrated. "Who is Vanessa Sterling?" Jessica asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. It cut through Richard's ongoing corporate lecture, causing him to freeze mid-sentence. Jessica leaned closer to the laptop. Her eyes darted back and forth between the offshore withdrawal amounts and the penthouse rental fees. The mathematical reality was undeniable. She read the date on the lease agreement. It was signed 8 months ago. "Who is Vanessa Sterling?" Jessica repeated, her voice rising into a sharp, frantic shriek. Brandon stepped back from the coffee table. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine. "Just let me explain," he stammered, reaching a hand out toward her. "It is a corporate holding property. We use it to host out-of-town clients. The name on the lease is just a property manager." "Do not lie to me!" Jessica screamed, swatting his hand away with terrifying force. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at the screen. "You told me we could not afford the kitchen remodel because your capital was tied up in long-term equity. You have been funneling $12,000 a month to pay for an apartment for another woman. You stole from your grandfather to pay for your mistress." The luxury suite dissolved into pure, unadulterated chaos. The pristine family image Richard and Brenda had spent decades cultivating was ripped apart in a matter of seconds. Jessica picked up the heavy crystal tumbler Brandon had left on the table. She hurled it across the room. The glass shattered against the mahogany closet door, sending amber liquor and sharp shards flying across the expensive carpet. She lunged at Brandon, striking his chest with her fists, crying hysterically about her ruined reputation. Brenda collapsed onto the velvet sofa. She clutched the fabric of her resort dress over her chest, gasping for air. Her face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. She was hyperventilating, unable to process the dual revelation that her husband was a thief and her perfect golden son was an adulterous fraud. The Highland Park facade was dead, and she was watching the corpse burn. Richard tried to intervene, grabbing Jessica by the shoulders to pull her away from Brandon. "Stop it!" Richard bellowed, his face contorted with rage. "Both of you stop acting like animals. We can fix this." Brandon broke free from the scuffle. His tailored shirt was wrinkled and torn near the collar. He marched toward the laptop, his eyes blazing with the desperate fury of a man losing his kingdom. He reverted to the only dynamic he understood, the golden child commanding the invisible workhorse. "Take that screen down right now," Savannah Brandon ordered. His voice shook with a toxic mixture of fear and unearned dominance. "Turn that presentation off. You are destroying this family. You listen to me and you take it down this instant." I sat in the quiet, rustic kitchen of the hill country farmhouse. The ancient grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway. I looked at the chaotic scene playing out on my monitor. 4 people trapped in an ocean far from home, tearing each other to pieces over lies they chose to tell. I did not take the screen down. I did not apologize for exposing the truth. I looked directly into the camera lens and allowed a sharp, uncompromising smile to form on my lips. "I am not destroying this family, Brandon," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly calm. "You did that all by yourself. I am simply providing the receipts." He stared at me, breathing heavily, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Since you are so concerned with asset management," I continued, "you should know I already executed a wire transfer this afternoon. I paid off the $315,000 balance on the shadow loan using a fraction of my lottery trust. The predatory lien is satisfied." Richard stopped trying to calm Brenda and turned toward the laptop. "You paid it off?" Richard asked, his tone shifting from rage to sudden greedy hope. He thought I was bailing them out. He thought the invisible daughter was fulfilling her role by cleaning up their mess. "I did," I confirmed. And then my attorney filed the legal paperwork to transfer the property deed into an irrevocable trust. Grandpa Wyatt is the sole lifetime beneficiary. I am the sole executor. The land is legally untouchable. The greedy hope vanished from Richard's eyes, replaced by a cold, hollow realization. "You and Brandon possess zero legal standing," I told them, my voice ringing with finality. "You cannot borrow against the acreage. You cannot inherit the property. You have zero access to the ranch. You have zero access to my money. When you return to Dallas, you will face a divorced wife, a ruined reputation, and an empty bank account. You bet everything on a golden child who robbed his own grandfather. You lost." Brandon opened his mouth to shout another desperate command. Brenda let out a loud, sobbing wail from the sofa. Jessica continued to hurl insults across the room. I did not stay to watch the rest of the performance. The verdict was delivered. The sentence was sealed. I moved my cursor over the red button at the bottom of the application. I clicked End Call. The video feed vanished. The chaotic screaming was instantly replaced by the profound, peaceful silence of the farmhouse. They were gone. They were trapped in a metal box in the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles away from the wreckage they created. I closed the laptop screen. I picked up my coffee mug and took a long, slow sip. The dark roast tasted incredible. The morning after the video call, I woke up before dawn. The Texas sky was a deep indigo, shifting into shades of bruised purple and burnt orange. I stepped out onto the wooden porch holding a mug of black coffee. The air was crisp and silent. Hundreds of miles away in the Gulf of Mexico, 4 people were waking up in a luxury suite, realizing their nightmare was not a bad dream. It was their new, permanent reality. They had 4 days left at sea. 4 days of forced proximity. 4 days of looking at each other, knowing the mainland held nothing but their impending ruin. I did not need to lift another finger to punish them. The architecture of their destruction was already built. I just had to watch gravity do the work. At 9 o'clock, my smartphone vibrated. Victor was calling from his Austin office. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He operated with lethal efficiency. The legal avalanche had officially commenced. Victor informed me he had formally submitted the documentation regarding the forged secondary mortgage to the district attorney. The local authorities were opening a criminal fraud investigation into Savannah Hall. The evidence was irrefutable. The blue ink signature on the notary page did not match Grandpa Wyatt's historical handwriting records. Furthermore, the funds were deposited directly into a corporate shell entity controlled entirely by my brother. It was a textbook case of elder financial exploitation. The district attorney categorized the offense as a first-degree felony, given the staggering dollar amount involved. But the local jurisdiction was merely the first layer of the avalanche. Brandon had routed the stolen capital across international borders. He utilized a domestic limited liability company in Delaware to layer the cash before wiring it to the Cayman Islands. That specific maneuver triggered federal oversight. Victor sent a detailed anonymous dossier to the Securities and Exchange Commission outlining the illicit offshore transfers. The SEC does not ignore well-documented tips regarding wealth managers hiding stolen assets. They initiated a formal inquiry. Federal agents were already preparing subpoenas for Brandon business records. His professional license was effectively suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. The lucrative career he paraded around family dinners was dead. The consequences did not stop at the edge of his corporate firm. The freeze on his accounts meant the monthly $12,000 wire transfer to the Austin Property Management Group bounced. Vanessa Sterling, his 24-year-old mistress, woke up in her luxury penthouse to an eviction warning taped to her door. The illusion of her wealthy benefactor evaporated, leaving her with nothing but unpaid bills and fake promises. The fallout did not spare my father. Richard had functioned as the primary facilitator for the fraudulent loan. He possessed his own extensive portfolio of leveraged assets, including the Highland Park estate and several luxury vehicles. The financial sector is an interconnected web built on risk assessment algorithms. When the shadow lender reported the fraudulent transaction and the subsequent legal intervention to the credit bureaus, a cascading failure occurred. Cross-default clauses embedded in Richard, other contracts activated. Secondary lenders panicked. They saw a man associated with a severe federal fraud inquiry. They immediately froze his lines of credit and demanded accelerated repayment on his outstanding balances. Within 48 hours, Richard's impeccable credit score was decimated. The country club he treated like a second home suspended his membership due to bounced monthly dues. The artificial wealth he spent decades cultivating evaporated into thin air. While their fake empire crumbled, I focused my energy on tangible things. I spent the next 4 days breathing life back into the Hill Country Ranch. The $50 million trust provided the capital required to undo years of neglect. I hired a crew of local contractors from the neighboring town. The quiet acreage transformed into a bustling hub of honest labor. Trucks carrying fresh lumber and heavy equipment rolled down the long dirt driveway. I walked alongside Grandpa Wyatt as he directed the workers. We replaced miles of rusted barbed wire with sturdy new fencing. We repaired the sagging roof of the main barn, securing the structure against the upcoming winter storms. I found profound joy in the act of creation. For years I existed as a forensic accountant, hunting down the broken pieces of shattered corporations. I lived in a state of perpetual untangling. Now I was building something real. I hired a team of painters to coat the exterior of the old farmhouse in a crisp, clean shade of white. The contractors installed new energy-efficient windows and reinforced the wrap-around porch. Wyatt sat in his rocking chair watching the transformation unfold. The heavy burden of his son betrayal was still visible in his eyes, but a new sense of peace settled over his shoulders. He knew his legacy was safe. He knew the land would survive. On the morning of the third day, my smartphone chimed with an incoming email notification. The luxury liner was nearing the end of its voyage. The ship had navigated close enough to the Florida coastline to acquire a weak cellular signal. The sender was Brenda. I opened the message and read the text on my glowing screen. The tone was a jarring departure from the arrogant commands she usually issued. It was a pathetic, desperate plea dripping with artificial victimhood. "Savannah, please read this," Brenda wrote. "We are living in a nightmare. Jessica filed for legal separation the second the ship acquired internet access. She locked Brandon out of the suite and refuses to speak to us. Your brother is in a very dark place. We received notifications from our banks. The accounts are frozen. Richard is beside himself with worry. We need an elite criminal defense attorney waiting for us when we dock in Galveston. We cannot access our funds. You have $50 million. You are his sister. Please transfer a retainer fee to a law firm. Do not abandon your family in our hour of need." I read the digital letter twice. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. My mother was begging the daughter she treated like a peasant to finance the legal defense of the son who robbed their patriarch. She still believed the concept of family loyalty only flowed in one direction. She wanted me to deploy my wealth to shield the golden child from the consequences of his own criminal actions. She wanted me to pay for the shield she tried to deny me. A year ago, I might have drafted a long response explaining my boundaries. I might have listed every insult, every slight, and every moment of profound disrespect they inflicted upon me. I might have tried to make her understand the depth of her hypocrisy. But true power requires zero explanation. I did not need to justify my refusal. I tapped the reply icon on my email application. A blank digital canvas appeared on my screen. I did not type a greeting. I did not offer a closing signature. I typed a single precise sentence. That sounds like a situation suited for your tax bracket. I hit send. The message vanished into the digital ether, traveling across the cellular networks to land directly in her inbox. I locked my phone and placed it in my pocket. I did not feel a rush of petty vindication. I felt a cool, profound emptiness regarding their existence. The emotional tether was permanently severed. I walked off the porch and headed toward the barn where the contractors were installing new structural beams. The smell of fresh sawdust filled the air. Tomorrow morning, the luxury liner would dock at the Galveston port. My parents and my brother would walk down the gangway and step onto the Texas mainland. They would not find a waiting limousine or a team of expensive defense attorneys. They would find a harsh, unforgiving reality. The storm they created was waiting for them at the terminal, and I would not be there to offer them an umbrella. The ocean breeze blowing across the Galveston port carried the heavy scent of salt water and diesel exhaust. The colossal luxury liner sounded its departure horn, signaling the end of the voyage. Hundreds of relaxed, sunburned tourists filed down the metal gangways, dragging their suitcases toward waiting shuttles. My family disembarked among the crowd, but they did not look like vacationers returning from a tropical paradise. They looked like prisoners walking toward the gallows. Jessica maneuvered her heavy leather luggage down the concrete ramp without waiting for assistance. Her posture was rigid, shielded by dark, oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed straw hat. Brandon trailed a few paces behind her. His tailored resort wear was wrinkled, his face shadowed by a 4-day beard, his eyes darting around the busy terminal. He resembled a deposed king stumbling through a foreign land, stripped of his crown and his confidence. "Just wait," Brandon pleaded, his voice cracking over the noise of the busy port. He reached a hand toward her shoulder. Jessica stepped sideways, evading his touch with practiced disgust. "Do not touch me," she stated, her words slicing through the humid coastal air like a blade. A sleek black rideshare vehicle pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out and loaded her designer bags into the spacious trunk. Brandon stood on the pavement, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. "Where are you going?" he asked, his tone laced with pathetic desperation. Jessica opened the passenger door and turned to face him one last time. "I am going to a divorce attorney in Houston," she replied, keeping her tone icy and measured. "My parents are wiring me the legal retainer. Have your public defender contact my counsel." She shut the heavy car door. The vehicle merged into the busy port traffic, leaving the former golden child stranded alone on the concrete. His trophy wife, his status symbol, and his artificial prestige vanished down the highway in a matter of seconds. Richard and Brenda observed the fracture of their son's marriage from a few yards away. They did not intervene. They carried their own heavy burdens toward their leased sedan in the long-term parking garage. The drive north along the interstate back to Dallas took 5 grueling hours. The interior of the vehicle remained shrouded in a suffocating silence. Neither spoke. Richard gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning pale, his mind racing to formulate a survival strategy. His entire identity rested on the perception of affluence. He believed that if he projected strength, the financial rumors would simply bounce off his pristine reputation. Upon reaching the city limits, Richard made a desperate tactical error. He bypassed their Highland Park neighborhood and steered the car directly toward their exclusive country club. He intended to walk into the grand dining room, order an expensive scotch, and pretend the federal inquiry was merely a minor clerical misunderstanding. He pulled up to the ornate portico. The valet attendant, a young man who usually rushed to open Richard's door with a welcoming smile, stood frozen near the wooden podium. Richard exited the vehicle, tossing his keys toward the young man, and marched toward the grand double doors. Brenda followed closely, her chin held artificially high, clinging to the last shreds of her social standing. The general manager intercepted them inside the marble foyer before they could reach the dining room threshold. The manager held a leather clipboard and wore an expression of practiced, icy politeness. "Richard Brenda," the manager said, keeping his voice low to avoid echoing in the grand hall. "I must ask you to leave the premises immediately." Richard straightened his posture, attempting to summon his usual bluster. "Excuse me, we are charter members here. We are going to have lunch in the grill room." The manager did not flinch. "Your membership is suspended indefinitely," he corrected. "The executive board convened an emergency meeting yesterday after the news of the SEC investigation broke. Furthermore, your primary bank declined the automatic withdrawal for your monthly dues this morning. I am sorry, but you are no longer welcome in this establishment." The humiliation was swift and surgical. Several affluent patrons walked past the foyer, averting their eyes, whispering behind manicured hands. The country club was a sanctuary for the elite, and the elite do not associate with federal fraud suspects. Richard's chest deflated. The polished facade cracked, revealing the terrified old man hiding underneath. He turned around and walked back out the glass doors, a broken patriarch carrying the weight of his own hubris. While my parents navigated their rapid descent into social exile, I finalized my transition into a new reality. I did not return to my modest suburban apartment. During the 4 days they spent trapped at sea, my attorney Victor helped me purchase an unlisted private estate on the outskirts of the city. The property sat behind 12-foot limestone walls surrounded by dense old-growth trees. Wrought iron gates guarded the entrance, operated by a secure keypad and monitored by a private security firm. I needed a sanctuary, a physical fortress to match the legal barriers I had constructed. I spent my afternoon reviewing the latest renovation blueprints for Grandpa Wyatt's ranch, sitting on a leather sofa in my new home office. The quiet hum of the central air conditioning provided a peaceful background noise. At 3 o'clock, the intercom on my desk chimed. The security guard stationed at the front gatehouse spoke through the small speaker. "Ms. Hall," the guard announced, "there is a vehicle blocking the entrance. The occupants are requesting access. They claim to be your parents." Aunt Caroline had likely uncovered my new address through county property records and shared it in the family group chat. Gossip travels faster than light in our bloodline. "Do not open the gate," I instructed the guard. "I will come down to address them." I stepped out the front door and walked down the long paved driveway. The afternoon sun warmed the pavement. 2 uniformed security personnel flanked me, their presence a silent testament to the structural shift in our dynamic. I approached the heavy iron bars. Richard and Brenda stood on the other side. The visual transformation was startling. They had aged a decade in a matter of days. Brenda's cashmere sweater hung loosely on her shrinking frame. Her pristine hairstyle was frayed by the coastal wind and nervous hands. Richard's shoulders slouched, his eyes darting nervously toward the armed security guards. They were no longer the arrogant monarchs of Highland Park. They were refugees seeking asylum from a storm they seeded. When Brenda saw me approaching, her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the harsh asphalt driveway. She did not care about her designer clothing or the dirt staining her slacks. She weaponized her grief, tears streaming down her face, her hands gripping the thick iron bars of the gate. "Savannah." Brenda wailed, her voice cracking with raw, unvarnished panic. "Please, you have to help us. The banks are foreclosing on the house. Richard's business associates will not return his calls. We have nothing left. We are your family. We raised you." Richard stood behind her, unable to meet my gaze. He stared at the pavement, his pride shattered, waiting for the invisible daughter to rescue his legacy. He wanted the workhorse to carry his burdens one last time. I stood on the pristine side of the barrier. I looked down at the woman weeping on the asphalt. My mind flashed back to the Thanksgiving patio. I remembered the mocking smirk on her face when she handed me that crumpled $2 lottery ticket. She had orchestrated a public humiliation, treating me like a peasant meant to amuse her wealthy guests. Now she was groveling in the dirt, begging for the very wealth she discarded. I did not feel the urge to yell. I did not feel a sudden rush of vindictive glee. I felt a profound, empathetic detachment. I looked at her with the clinical precision of a forensic accountant observing a closed ledger. The math was simple. The debts were tallied, the account was bankrupt. Apologies expire. I stated, my voice smooth and unyielding in the quiet afternoon air. Boundaries do not. You bet everything on a golden child who robbed his own grandfather. You lost. Brenda gasped, her hands slipping from the iron bars. Richard closed his eyes, accepting the finality of the verdict. I did not linger to watch them mourn their fractured empire. I turned my back on my parents. I walked up the long driveway toward my secure home, the gravel crunching softly beneath my shoes. Behind me, the heavy iron gates remained locked, permanently sealing the past outside my walls. 6 months have passed since I locked the heavy iron gates of my private estate, sealing my former abusers on the outside. Today, I am sitting on the wraparound wooden porch of Grandpa Wyatt Hill Country Ranch. It is late spring in Texas. Fields of wild bluebonnets stretch across the rolling acreage, painting the rugged landscape in vibrant shades of indigo and violet. The old farmhouse stands behind me, pristine and secure. The fresh white exterior paint gleams under the bright midday sun. The sagging roof is fully repaired. The rusted barbed wire is replaced by strong steel fencing, securing the perimeter for decades to come. Wyatt is sitting in his favorite wooden rocking chair a few feet away from me. He is holding a glass of iced sweet tea, watching his cattle graze near the southern limestone ridge. The heavy, crushing burden of betrayal no longer shadows his eyes. He is at peace. His physical health has improved tremendously since the stress of the impending foreclosure evaporated. He walks the land with a renewed sense of purpose. He knows his legacy remains intact, protected by an unbreakable legal fortress that no greedy relative can ever breach. The justice system operates slowly, but it grinds exceedingly fine. Brandon is currently awaiting trial in a high-security federal detention facility. The Securities and Exchange Commission did not offer a lenient plea agreement. When federal agents audited his corporate holding company, they uncovered a labyrinth of wire fraud and money laundering that extended far beyond our grandfather. He had defrauded multiple wealthy clients to sustain his artificial luxury lifestyle. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands were frozen and subsequently seized by government authorities. His domestic assets were liquidated to pay forced restitution. His trophy wife Jessica finalized her divorce months ago, securing whatever residual capital remained before the federal indictments officially landed on his desk. His former mistress Vanessa turned state witness, providing federal prosecutors with every digital communication and financial receipt in exchange for full legal immunity. The golden child is staring down a mandatory federal prison sentence measuring in decades. He traded his family legacy for a concrete cell and a standard-issue uniform. Richard and Brenda experienced a similar vertical drop into harsh reality. Defending a federal wire fraud case requires an astronomical amount of liquid cash. To afford Brandon competent legal representation, they were forced to liquidate their entire Highland Park existence. The sprawling custom mansion was sold at a steep loss to satisfy their panicked creditors. The leased luxury vehicles were repossessed, leaving empty spots in a driveway they no longer owned. They now reside in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment situated next to a noisy interstate highway on the dusty outskirts of Dallas. Their elite social circle abandoned them the exact moment the criminal investigation hit the local evening news cycle. Wealthy suburban enclaves do not tolerate the stench of public failure. They are isolated from the community they once ruled. They occasionally mail handwritten letters to my secure address, begging for a reconciliation or hinting at a temporary financial loan. I recognize my mother looping handwriting on the cheap envelopes. I mark them return to sender and drop them back into the postal system unopened. My boundary is a solid, impenetrable wall, and I do not lower the drawbridge for anyone who views my kindness as a weakness. People often assume that inheriting or winning a vast fortune fundamentally alters a person. They think sudden money changes your core personality. That is a dangerous myth. Capital merely amplifies who you already are. If you are greedy and hollow, wealth will accelerate your moral decay. If you are pragmatic and fiercely protective, wealth simply hands you the tools to build a taller fence. The $50 million did not make me a different woman. I am still Savannah Hall. I am still a forensic accountant who finds deep comfort in tracing ledgers and uncovering the hidden truth. The jackpot merely provided the architecture required to enforce my boundaries on a grand scale. I no longer fold linen napkins at toxic family gatherings. I dictate the precise terms of my own existence. I realized very quickly that I could not simply let the remaining trust funds sit stagnant in a bank vault gathering interest. Grandpa Wyatt survived an attempted financial assassination because he had a granddaughter possessing the specific forensic skills needed to expose the crime. Thousands of elderly citizens across this state do not have that protective barrier standing between them and ruin. They are highly vulnerable to predatory lending practices and greedy relatives eager to hijack their life savings while they are distracted by failing health. Therefore, I established a new philanthropic entity. I named it the Wyatt Shield Foundation. We are a dedicated legal advocacy group operating out of a sleek office space in downtown Austin. I utilized a significant portion of the lottery winnings to hire a relentless team of private investigators, corporate auditors, and seasoned litigation attorneys. We function as a specialized strike force. We audit suspicious elder estates upon request. We hunt down shadow lenders who prey on fixed-income seniors. We file relentless civil suits against family members who attempt to forge signatures or steal property equity from vulnerable individuals. Just last week, our foundation secured a permanent injunction against a nephew attempting to drain his aunt's retirement accounts in Houston. We recovered every stolen dollar. Handing that woman her reclaimed bank statements felt better than any lottery payout I could ever receive. We provide the forensic firepower that victims simply cannot afford themselves. We turn invisible targets into formidable opponents. When I sit on this porch and look at the thriving life I built, I often reflect on that crisp Thanksgiving dinner. I think about the mocking, theatrical smile on my mother's face when she handed me that crumpled $2 ticket in front of 30 laughing relatives. She intended to put me in my place. She wanted to remind me that I was merely the overhead cost in her perfect family production. She succeeded. She put me in a place of untouchable authority. I spent the first 3 decades of my life working quietly in the background, hoping my parents would eventually recognize my inherent value. I waited patiently for an invitation to sit at the head of their polished table. I eventually learned a harsh but incredibly necessary lesson regarding human nature. True power does not come from seeking petty revenge against those who wronged you. Revenge is a chaotic emotion, and emotion clouds rational judgment. True power comes from unearthing the cold, hard truth and letting the evidence speak for itself. It comes from shielding the innocent and protecting the vulnerable from exploitation. Most importantly, true power originates from the profound courage required to stand up and walk away from tables where you are only invited to serve. You do not need a winning Mega Millions ticket to free yourself from a toxic family dynamic. You only need the firm resolve to stop accepting the bare minimum from people who constantly demand your maximum effort. You are not required to set yourself on fire simply to keep your abusers warm. You hold the pen that writes the next chapter of your life. Make sure you are the main character and not just the supporting cast. If you have ever been the invisible workhorse in your family, drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe if you know the value of walking away. See you next time. In America, we are often sold the dream that success, a sudden windfall, a prestigious title, or a sprawling estate will finally make us visible to the people who always looked right past us. But if my journey has taught me anything, it is that wealth does not change your core. It merely amplifies it. A simple lottery ticket didn't make me ruthless, and $50 million didn't buy me my parents' genuine affection. It simply handed me the tools I needed to barricade my peace and protect the only family member who truly saw my worth. We spend so much of our lives waiting for a seat at a toxic table, forgetting that we have the power to walk out the front door and build our own house. If this resonates with the silent battles you are fighting, please subscribe to Eldenly Stories for more narratives about reclaiming your truth. The hardest part of walking away isn't the physical distance you put between yourself and the people who broke you. It is that quiet, lingering moment when you look back at the locked gate and wonder, if they had just passed you a plate instead of a punchline, who might you all be right now?